Okay, so quick return to the different types of efficiency, PPF and efficiency. So this is actually new to study design, and you need to be able to relate how efficiency and the PPF are related to each other. So I won't go through the definitions again, but we'll talk about the different types of efficiency and how they're related to the PPF. So here we've got a little PPF in blue. And this is a hypothetical country that's producing either tobacco or lettuce. Okay, so productive efficiency is all points along the PPF, because at all points we're producing as much as we possibly can, using all our inputs as efficiently as possible. We're minimizing our per unit cost, so we're minimizing our inputs but maximizing output. So everywhere along this line we have productive efficiency. So everywhere along the PPF is productive efficiency. Next, we'll talk about allocative efficiency. So allocative efficiency is at only a single point on the PPF. So this single point is where resources are being allocated in a way that maximizes society's living standard. So firstly, we already assume that we're achieving productive efficiency. And secondly, second condition is the resources that we are using to produce the goods and services, and we are producing the goods and services that are good for society, that will maximize its well-being and maximize its overall living standards. So for example, here in tobacco versus lettuce, you can see that it's probably a good idea to produce all lettuce rather than producing tobacco. So that would be allocative efficiency. It's where people's health is being maximized. We're not producing lots and lots of goods with negative externalities like tobacco. So that's where we're getting lettuce. So if we produce only lettuce, that is what is best for society rather than producing lots of tobacco. Next is dynamic efficiency. So it's basically how quickly producers can move along the PPF. So how can they use the resources that they already have to produce a new good or service that's actually in more demand. So for example here, if people's tastes change and there is greater demand for lettuce, so let's say the yellow is the initial supply and then the green here is the final supply. If people's have a different taste, they decide that they like different things, there's a shift in resources. So for example, let's say people demand more lettuce. Dynamic efficiency is when producers are able to recognize that the demand for tobacco has changed and there is now more demand for lettuce, and they shift the resources that they already have into producing lettuce instead. So that's where we achieve dynamic efficiency. So it's related to 2 points on the PPF and moving from one point to another point. Okay, so finally, here we've got intertemporal efficiency. So intertemporal efficiency it's a bit difficult to see on the PPF, but it's about maximizing future living standards in addition to current living standards. So here we've got the black line, which is the current PPF, and then this green is our intertemporal efficiency. So over time, we need to be able to increase our productive capacity. We need to be more productive over time and be able to produce more over time so that we can keep up with increasing demand, increasing population, and I guess the increasing need for greater production. So that will achieve intertemporal efficiency if we can maintain our production over time by increasing our productive capacity, increasing our productivity. If we're not able to do that, if we deplete our resources and we run out of resources, we can actually force the PPF to go inwards. So this would actually decrease our productive capacity in the future, and it wouldn't help us achieve intertemporal efficiency. So that pretty much summarizes the PPF. So now we'll come back to topic and we'll talk about aggregate demand and aggregate supply again. You'll see on this graph, so like I mentioned earlier, the vertical axis is the price level. So it's not just prices, it's the price level. And then the horizontal axis is the real GDP. So it's not quantity, it's now real GDP. And aggregate demand and aggregate supply, they have an effect on our economic growth, they have an effect on our prices within the economy, they have an effect on unemployment. So I hope that the moment that you hear me say these words, you're thinking about the 3 goals. So economic growth, that relates to the strong and sustainable economic growth. Prices, that relates to inflation. So the price level, so the changing price level, that's pretty much is what inflation is all about. And then unemployment, the goal of low unemployment, the goal of full employment. So we'll go through the shifts. We'll see how they affect the different parts of the economy as well. Okay, so now let's talk about unemployment. So unemployment is all about spare labor resources. So labor resources that we have available, but we're just not using because we have no need for them at the moment. So if we look at this graph, we've got aggregate supply, which is the curve, and then aggregate demand, which is again downward sloping. There is a point where the demand and supply are meeting, so that's where we've got the price level, we've got the GDP that determines how much we're producing, and then everywhere from there to our productive capacity, so that's shown by our dotted line, that's spare capacity. So that's all our resources that we're not really using. We're inside our productive capacity because we're not using all our resources, and that's where unemployment comes from. So it's just spare resources that are not being used. Okay, so we can also have shifts in aggregate demand. Again, what causes shifts in aggregate demand? A lot of things. So things like income, so overall levels of income, things like interest rates, taxes, those kind of things affect our aggregate demand. So for example, here we've got our first graph, and then we can see that aggregate demand has shifted to the right. So it's basically telling us that overall there's been an increase in the level of aggregate demand. So things that could have potentially caused an increase in the aggregate demand, lower taxes, lower interest rates potentially because people are more likely to be able to get loans and buy more things. So those two definitely really big causes of shifts in aggregate demand. So what happens when aggregate demand shifts to the right? So first of all, you can see that the price has increased. So there's been an increase in the price level, and that suggests that if that increase in the price level is sustained, so if it keeps happening and if that increase continues to happen for a period of time, that results in inflation. Next, we can see that the GDP has increased, so there's an increase in the overall level of production as well. So that suggests economic growth. So we can see that a shift in aggregate demand, an increase in aggregate demand, brings us closer to our productive capacity, and it also helps promote economic growth. It also causes inflation as well. If we have aggregate supply shifting, so for example, we've got aggregate supply shifting right, we can see that there's no huge change in the price. It's relatively stable, but there's a big change in the GDP. So aggregate supply shifting, it doesn't really result in a lot of inflation, but it does result in a big change in GDP, a big increase in GDP, and therefore it results in economic growth, but without the pressure of inflation.